welcome back to Midpoint. I'm Sean Kinane, the host of Midpoint Monday. In a moment, we'll take your calls about last Thursday's major announcement that BP has settled with 5 Gulf of Mexico states, including Florida, for $18.3 billion in damages resulting from the 2010 Deepwater Horizon disaster. We want you to join the conversation. The number to call is 813-239-9663. You can also email your question or comment to dj@wmnf.org. You can text us at 813-433-0885. And the sooner you call in or text us your message or however you want to contact us, the more likely it is that we'll be able to get to that. So the number is 813-239-9663. Our guests today are environmentalist Cathy Harrelson and Andy Squires from Pinellas County. Andy is the section manager for Pinellas' Coastal and Freshwater Resources section manager in the Natural Resources Division. So thank you so much for coming to Midpoint, and welcome Cathy and Andy.
Good to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. Why don't we begin by just talking about the scope and the scale of the BP oil disaster and what kind of effect it had on Florida.
Well, the BP disaster is unprecedented in any oil spill scenario really around the world, but certainly in the Gulf of Mexico and in the United States waters. So the effects of it are still out there. We have seen those effects come forward over the last 5 years, and we expect to see them going beyond today, beyond the settlement.
And I can put that in perspective to the Exxon Valdez oil spill in 1989, and that spill was 1/12 of the size of the spill of BP, so it's a significant spill.
And now to the settlement. The total settlement was $18.7 billion, and that's made up of 3 different areas that we might get to during the show. And Florida specifically will get $3.25 billion. And Andy, the reason I asked you on the show is because you are kind of one of the people who will be responsible for figuring out where does that money go in Pinellas County? What types of projects will it be used for? So give us an idea, without knowing exactly how much Pinellas will get necessarily, but what are some of the priorities? What are some of the projects that have priority in Pinellas County if it does get money for the settlement?
Well, actually we already have some money allocated to Pinellas County from the $1 billion that Transocean has put into the fund. And we've basically set up through a process last year, starting in January 2014, a process with the working group that Cathy's on, that working group of 17 individuals, citizen-based group of individuals representing the cities, academia, fishing industry interests, environmental agencies, and that type of thing. And so we went through a process last year. It took about 5 months to develop a set of project selection and ranking criteria. And the working group helped the county staff develop that, and we went through a process, got commission approval, and once that was done, basically this fall we put out a request for proposals out to the general public. We received 17 proposals. We selected and ranked those with the subcommittee of the working group and county staff. We came up with 4 projects. So we already have 4 projects in the mix right now. Just real briefly, and it's all on our website in the county, but real briefly.
Do you have the website?
Yeah, it's www.pinellascounty.org. That's our home page. If you go to that page, about 2/3 of the way down the page, it says the Restore Act. Just click on that, and it brings you to more information you might want to know about the Restore Act and what the Pinellas County is doing. And it summarizes all the meetings we've had with the working group, and it has a copy of our draft plan that we're going to be submitting to the Treasury later this summer with our 4 projects in it, and it outlines the entire process we use to get to that. But the projects in general for this, only $1.5 million doesn't go a long way. But we have one project which is basically it's a infrastructure feasibility assessment. We're using a GIS tool to look at our coastline and our infrastructure, such as countywide, such as wastewater treatment plants, transportation, piping systems, the infrastructure in general in the county, and its vulnerability to sea level rise. And so we're looking at that and doing an economic assessment of that analysis with this GIS tool. And plugged into that GIS tool will be various sea level rise scenarios for this area. And the final outcome of that project, the way I see it right now, will be a set of projects that we can basically prioritize based on the scenarios, and then put into our long-term capital improvement program budget. So things, as we look forward, tens and decades down the line, and we don't want to build wastewater treatment plants or floodplains anymore. We want to make sure that as we do those things, we do them in the right place, and so we need to plan for that appropriately.
That's one of the 4 projects that you have prioritized?
Yes, the other ones, there's a couple of ocean science projects that USF College of Marine Science is doing. One is a buoy that's going to be re-instrumented offshore Passive-Rill, and that provides detailed atmospheric and ocean information to supplement various coastal models that USF has provided, and that's great for predicting what storm damage might happen to the coastline, and it gives us an idea of the circulation patterns in the Gulf of Mexico. And that USF began this program back in 1998 and developed a series of 16 to 18 buoys along the Gulf Coast of Florida, all the way from Taylor County down to close to Monroe County, and Collier County, and they use this to help predict how the water moves in the Gulf and the wave action, what impact it might have on the coastline. So we want to help bring this information back because they lost funding for many of these buoys. I think there's 8 left now, so we're trying to build that back up, and we want to support that project. The third project is another USF College of Marine Science project. And that project is related to this, but it's really looking at a very detailed, cutting-edge, 3-dimensional water quality model in Tampa Bay. That model also expands down into Sarasota Bay, the Intercoastal Waterway, and even the inlets, which is very unusual for a model of the Tampa Bay area. And what USF wants to do is make this information more available to the public and other research institutes by creating what's called a nowcast forecast model with that information, so someone can go on the internet, plug into that model, look at the existing conditions, and forecast conditions out in the future.
And so those are the 2 with USF, and
Right.
then there's a 4th.
There's a 4th one, that's Pinellas County, another Pinellas County project. The first project incident was a Pinellas County project as well. The last project is really for the Parks and Conservation Resources Department. Fort DeSoto Park has a large expanse of sand dunes. And right now, people are cutting through the sand dunes, building paths through it, really compromising the sand dunes themselves. And so we want to build some, basically, doing walkovers over the structure. So we've allocated some funds to provide the money to do that. So that's going to protect that important dune habitat.
That's Andy Squires from Pinellas County. He's the section manager for coastal and freshwater resources in the Natural Resources Division of Pinellas County. And Cathy Harrelson, so you were on the committee or the panel that helped to decide that these were some of the priorities. As an environmentalist, why are these kinds of projects important for the coastline of Pinellas County?
Well, one of the key issues that the Restore Act and the Gulf Council determined was important was community resilience. So among the other criteria, but that one doesn't get as much discussion, but it's really important to the future, and that's what we were trying to look at in our working groups, among the other criteria that we used. But that one is one that enabled us to look at these projects from a longer-term perspective and how sea level rise and other events over time will be affecting the county, affecting its ecosystems and certainly its people and its economic base. So that was a primary driver in selecting those projects.
We have a call on the line we're going to go to in just a second, but I wanted to give out the number again. The number to call to join this conversation is 813-239-9663. You can also email your questions or comments to dj@wmnf.org, or you can text us at 813-433-0885. And tell us where you're calling from and what your name is if you text us, because we don't have any other way of knowing that if you do. It's 12:26 in the afternoon. My name is Sean Kinane, and you're listening to Midpoint. My guests are Cathy Harrelson, environmentalist, and Andy Squires from Pinellas County. And we'll go now to Clay in Land O'Lakes. Hi, Clay.
But your settlement fund.
Okay, so let's start with that. That's a good question. Senator Bill Nelson criticized the amount of the settlement. He said for this being one of the largest environmental damages ever, disasters ever, that this was not enough money. So why did the states settle for maybe such a low amount, if $18.7 billion can be considered a low amount?
Well, one of the problems that I see with this is that the way the trial was going is that the judge was looking favorably toward the maximum Clean Water Act fines. Well, this settlement does not include that maximum. This settlement includes 5.5 billion Clean Water Act penalties, whereas 13.7 billion would have been allowed under the gross negligence statute that was affirmed by the courts earlier this year. So, yeah, we do feel that this is really quite low. Certainly any settlement is welcome. The funding will be put to good use, but the reality is this is a terrible disaster. It's an ongoing disaster, and 13.7 billion would have made more sense, if not more. Additionally, it is murky as to whether there's any sort of reopener clause in this settlement, which is a big deal. This was a big part of the stumbling block that was preventing the settlement, and they've put forward a fairly small amount of funds, 700 million, to respond to any future damages, and that just is, we feel, we in the environmental community feel is inadequate to the kind of damage that we're still seeing and we expect to see far in the future in the Gulf.
I can probably make a couple more comments on that, if that's okay. Oh,
You are, Tim.
excellent point, and we really don't have a good answer for that. I guess time will tell. The jury's still out on that. But yeah, that's an excellent point, and really unanswered at this time.
And thanks for the call, Clay. And just a second ago, Andy, you were about to follow up on.
Well,
what
I just wanted to say that Cathy's point was absolutely correct. That the penalty is less than we anticipate. In fact, when it was signed, when the Restorac was signed into law in 2012, people were speculating we could be looking at a $20 billion settlement. And then just recently, some of the local counties and the Gulf Consortium, which is the group looking at how to spend the state funds here, they signed a resolution, and I want to walk you through the resolution. It's very interesting. They're comparing to the Exxon Valdez spill in 1989 in Prince William Sound. And basically, they're urging the Department of Justice to consider a fine parity of the BP spill compared to the Exxon Valdez. Let me walk you through this. It's very interesting. In the Exxon Valdez spill, they found that they operated with gross negligence. That's also true with the BP spill. They also, of course, violated federal laws in the Exxon Valdez spill, and the 1991 settlement was for $1.125 billion, with the spill of only 262,000 barrels of oil. Now, look at the Deepwater Horizon spill, the BP spill. It was also ruled that it was operating with gross negligence. It also violated federal environmental laws, and the court ruled that 3.19 million barrels of oil was spilled. That's 12 times greater than the Exxon Valdez spill. And with that ruling, and they looked at the maximum fine, as Cathy said, of $13.7 billion. So the bottom line is the resolution argues that the maximum BP fine should be adjusted for the size of the spill and for the inflation since 1989 to 2010, which is at 76%. If you do the numbers, I'm trusting an article I read on this, they think the adjustment in the dollars and the fine for the BP spill should be at $24 billion. So, and that resolution was sent to Senator Nelson.
And that the $24 billion that you're talking about, when you do the math and you're comparing it to the Exxon Valdez, that's just for the Clean Water Act violation part, like with the Restore Act part.
Correct. Right.
Which in this settlement, we're talking $5 billion.
5.5. Yes.
So that's, that seems kind of close to 18 billion, but we're not looking at the 18 billion number.
Right.
We're looking at the 5.5 billion.
Exactly.
Well, let me go to someone who texted in a minute ago, and this person from the 813 area code says, did I hear right that the BP settlement equals 3 months of company profit? I guess that's right. It took them 3 months to stop the leak. So is that right?
That's consistent with what I've read in the paper.
Right, I've heard that number as well.
Yeah.
So I think what the text message person is saying is that it's kind of a slap on the wrist almost. In fact, the first year right after it happened, I remember BP claimed $20 billion in losses, which meant that their tax bill was reduced by $10 billion. So right there, they essentially got a $10 billion windfall, and now here's this $18 billion settlement. Is there going to be more? Could there be more? This is for the states. Now, what about for private businesses?
That claim amount for private businesses and individuals that have filed private claims has not been determined yet. So yes, there certainly could be more, and there should be.
Well, that brings up a question I got on Twitter earlier, and there was a gentleman who was asking, it's Eugene Beal, he was asking, when will the last minute claimants hear anything? They filed their claims within the last week, so if this is either an individual or a business who says they lost money from the Gulf oil spill. I know you aren't legal experts, but what do you think the timeline is based on what we know for when they might hear about what their damages would be?
Well, I don't know the answer, but I will say that my son has filed a claim. We filed on the deadline date, which was June 8th, and we have not heard yet. So I would also like to know the answer to that question.
Yeah, neither do I have any idea when that will be.
Our caller brought up the question of the dispersant. Do either of you have an opinion about whether this was a good strategy to use? We've heard lots of things about, well, it broke it up at the surface, but now we're finding it at the bottom. The combination of the dispersant and the oil was more toxic than either one would have been on its own. Did Corexit make the problem worse, and should it be used in a future oil disaster?
Well, I think Corexit very definitely made the problem worse. It basically took a spill that ultimately what could have been broken down by naturally occurring organisms in the Gulf. Admittedly, a terrible problem for beaches and wetlands. But the fact is, breaking it up into tiny droplets has just made it more available to the base of the food chain. And that has, we were seeing the repercussions of that up and down the food chain, up and down the water column in the Gulf. It is a very big problem, not to mention the fact that it is making people very sick. So it's, because it's obviously also aerosolized, in a sense, the oil, and made it more accessible to people's lungs and people's skin. And so this is the kind of thing where the long-term impacts we still don't know yet. And that's why we're concerned about this settlement for many reasons, but that not having the ability to reopen this is a big deal.
The number to call is 813-239-9663. You can also email us at dj@wmnf.org or give us a text at 813-433-0885 if you have a question for our guests. That's Cathy Harrelson, an environmentalist. We also have Andy Squires from Pinellas County. So give us a call on midpoint. It's 12:34 in the afternoon, and we'd like to hear your questions. Now, recently, a USF study found that there was BP, Deepwater Horizon oil, on Pinellas County beaches. How much oil was there, and why was it there and not gone, not dispersed by by Corexit, and not cleaned up in any other ways? How did it get to Pinellas County?
I can kind of respond to that. The person who did that study is Dr. John Paul at USF College of Marine Science, and I have talked to him on the phone about that a little bit over the last several months. And the amount that reached the beaches, my understanding, is very trace amounts of small sand globules found at Sunset Beach and Treasure Island. Someone saw these little things on the beach, recognized it might be clots of oil, contacted the university, they went and sampled it. They found very trace amounts, but they did blueprint that back to the oil that was found on the beaches in North Florida. And so they claim they have the fingerprint and that's found. So in terms of the circulation patterns in the Gulf of Mexico, it's a clockwise, the Gulf Stream does a clockwise loop, but the Gulf of Mexico normally doesn't come close to the west coast of Florida. But there are times when the eddies and things like that can break off and distribute currents and water close to the shoreline. So I'd have to surmise, and of course, the experts at USF would be the ones who better answer this question, but I would surmise that it found its way here.
Right, and that oil was actually originally discovered in January of 2013. So it took, 2.5 years or so that we know of, to make it this far, and then the study was done after that. So yeah, the Gulf is a dynamic system, and with a great deal of interactive ecosystems taking place. So I think that right around, we also saw a report of oil in Tampa Bay as well. So it wasn't just on the beaches, but it's really made its way all the way through. Not in an amount that is probably going to harm us, but it is something to be aware of.
Reading between the lines, and I could see the expression in your face when you were telling the story about how it took that long to get here. I'm kind of reading that maybe you think, and there's more out there, and maybe we'll see it again.
Well, every time there's a storm, and we've had a lack of storms in the last few years, as we well know, but every time there's a storm, it tends to bring that oil that's sitting right now in the deep canyons over toward Louisiana up and into the system.
I have a question for you, Andy. Which organizations have BP funds or will be getting BP funds so that they can, that once these funds are used, they can improve the quality of the Gulf, presumably?
Yeah, it's, the flow of funds for the oil spill is rather complex, to say the least. I'm looking at a graphic here, and it'll probably make you go buggy, but essentially, the funds go in three different buckets, I'll say, for lack of a better term. We've been talking about the Clean Water Act civil and administrative penalties, the Restore Act funds, that's just one of three. Another one's the criminal penalties, and the third is the natural resource damage assessment penalties. So those are the 3 points, the buckets, fund buckets, so to speak. Now, let's talk about the Clean Water Act. We talked pretty much about who's spending that money, the states, the counties, the various entities within the counties. Just go move to criminal penalties. They've received so far $4 billion from BP and $400 million from Transocean. Those funds are being looked after by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They've got $2.5 billion, trying to get my zeros straight here, that they're going to put out. In fact, I think some of those projects have already been identified. Most of those will go to Louisiana, about 50% of the money. The rest will be divided among the other 4 states. So it's really that's going to the jurisdiction of the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and also the National Academy of Science has $500,000 to put out in studies. A chunk of that criminal penalty also goes to the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, and some to the Treasury. Now moving on to the Natural Resource Damage Assessment dollars, those essentially have been used to, those are monies used to repair damage done by the oil spills itself, whereas the Restore funds go way beyond just specific damage from the oil. They go on to enhance the economic environmental viability of the Gulf of Mexico. But those funds have been spent on various, mainly in the Louisiana coast and North Florida coast, where there's actually damage done, where they're taking oil off the beaches. You saw that on TV. Moving oil from the marshes, and even some money to rebuild sand dunes, things like that.
That's Andy Squires from Pinellas County. We also have environmentalist Cathy Harrelson here, and they'd like to take your calls. The number is 813-239-9663, and we have Craig on the line in Dunedin. Hi, Craig. That's great. How are you?
Oh, my facts might be a little bit off, but I believe I remember them saying there was a theory that there are these large vertical plumes of oil built from the Deepwater Horizon that are basically stagnant in the Gulf. And I don't know if they've proven that they exist there, but they think they do because the current isn't that strong, I guess, in some places. So my question is has that been proven that they exist? And are there any plans to clean that up? And also, how many other rigs are out there like that? And, has anything been done to improve them so something like that doesn't happen again?
All right. Thanks for your calls, Craig. Call.
This is Cathy. Well, in answer to your question about the plumes, yes, I know USF has been studying those. Exactly how much of that has been mapped, I don't know the answer to. But I do know that vertical plumes are what they have seen out there. Due to the pressure and the deep, that's a mile deep in the Gulf, so there's a great deal of pressure there. It tends to keep things down toward the bottom, but when you have different levels, you have the oil itself, the dispersed oil, they do tend to column like that.
Yeah, I don't have any, this is Andy, I don't really have any other information other than that I've heard of this, don't know how many specifics of it, but upwelling regions in the Gulf are pretty common, and so none of this really surprises me.
And in answer to your question about the number of rigs, there are thousands of rigs. There are some maps out there that the U.S. Geological Survey and BOEM, which is the U.S. essentially Department of Energy, has on their websites that would shock you really if you said it's a solid, literally a solid picture at the mouth of the Mississippi River and beyond. Fortunately, a great deal has been done to keep oil drilling off the coast of Florida, and we want to keep it that way. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your call, Craig. 813-239-9663 if you'd like to join the conversation. I want to ask now about and maybe Andy, you might be the best person to ask this. If Pinellas is going to be getting some more money, and so presumably you'll be trying to figure out what are the next projects that will be funded, what's that process going to be like? How are you going to solicit input from people about what maybe beach restoration or dune restoration, like you were talking about what was happening in Fort DeSoto? How can people suggest projects?
Right. Those funds, based on the information out there now, assuming the settlement goes through and the court approves it, we're not looking at a great deal of money coming to Pinellas County, specifically under what I call the direct component portion of the Restore Act funds coming to Florida. So we're looking at maybe somewhere around the neighborhood of $5 to $8 million spread out over 15 payments over 15 years. So we're talking about just a few $100,000 a year. So I think what the county strategy may end up being is we wait 3 or 4 years for that fund to build up so we can actually get some real projects done. And I think we'll probably adopt the existing process we've already identified in terms of the selection and ranking process. We may tweak it some based on input from the working group. We can bring it back together. But so basically we're following the same process. Some of the priorities that Cathy mentioned before will withstand. We look at water quality and habitat. Resiliency will be a big issue. We've identified priority issues for the county. We'll stick with those for now. And how someone gets involved in this is they stay in touch with the county. You can go to the website. Last time we put a portal on the website where people could click on it, see all the information, just submit a proposal, submit it under the designated time frame, and that's really what we'll probably do next time as well, is advertise it in the news release, put it on our website, people can click on it, fill out the application form, and they'll be selected and ranked like we did this last time.
And a couple of those projects that we chose in the Pinellas Working Group had to do with information gathering. And one of the issues that came up right away when the BP disaster happened was the lack of baseline information. That's where this money going to the educational consortiums and the scientific study consortiums is really important. And it's the kind of thing we're trying to do. If you get your baseline, if you get your information, then you can develop your projects more intelligently.
We talked earlier about the bulk of the money that in this settlement and a lot of the money that's already come in from BP to the states and to the communities comes from the Restore Act. So, Andy, maybe if you could just tell me, basically, tell our listeners, what is the